Vento Aureo, aka Golden Wind, is the 5th part of the JoJo's series, taking place after Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. Golden Wind has been labeled by fans as an underwhelming sequel to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Like Diamond is Unbreakable, Vento Aureo also had the poor treatment of having rough translations, but as of this video's release, new translations are being made. Aside from the mistranslations and double-page spreads, much criticism has been set on its main villain and even its main character. Upon rereading the series, I discovered there's a lot of good going for Parte V. Despite my praise, there are some undeniable cons that really affected the story of Golden Wind. Part 5 isn't bad, but could have been greater. Vento Aureo originally debuted in Shonen Jump in 1995, yet the story's settings in 2001, taking place in the country of Italy. It should be noted that Part 5 has various names ranging from the English Golden Wind, the Japanese Ogo no Kaze, and its Italian name Le Bizarre Avventure di JoJo Parte V Vento Aureo. Upon discovering the existence of Dio's son, Jotaro sends Koichi to verify his suspicions. It is quickly revealed that Giorno Giovanna is indeed Dio Brando's son, but also carries the Joestar bloodline upon bearing the Joestar birthmark. Thus, he is also Jonathan's second son? Possibly inheriting traits of both fathers, Giorno is a charismatic, intelligent individual who carries a virtuous heart but is willing to commit crimes for peace. Giorno proves this by entering the Italian gangstar organization known as Passione or Passion. His goal is to rid the streets of drug trafficking, keeping kids and minors drug-free. He is placed in a faction led by Bruno Buccellati, who also wishes to stop the organization's drug routes and to eliminate the boss. The adventure begins after the death of an operative and the revelation of the boss's daughter, who must be protected by traitorous stand-user assassins. While the new ultra-fabulous art style takes some time getting used to, the appeal of Part 5 is the action. Unlike Parts 3 and 4, Vento Aureo manages to have this ongoing action with nearly non-stop presence. Like its predecessors, Part 5 also has the villain of the week formula, but does it faster. Parts 3 and 4 catered more to creating suspense, often results in the battles to be a bit dragged out, and bear very little physical contact. Golden Wind instead dives straight into the fights, often centered on chases, gunfire, stabbing, and some actual fistfights. The enemy's first appearances still remain suspenseful, yet would often have our anti-heroes think of a quick solution, making the battles move in a much faster pace. Furthermore, the addition of bullet-firing stands such as Sex Pistols and Aerosmith allowed for a new form of combat in JoJo, who would also end most battles in a standoff, with both anti-hero and villain about to unleash their trump card at the last second. The plot, however, still carries the same pattern as seen in Parts 3 and 4, including a repetitive conflict. As I mentioned previously in my review of Diamond is Unbreakable, Part 5 also recycles its plot, but includes some misdirection. The first chapter is set from Koichi's viewpoint, which gradually changed to Giorno taking the spotlight. The story then follows Giorno as he enters the Passion Gang, which actually leads to a very big plot hole. I think the imagery speaks for itself. Giorno's first assignment is to recover some treasure, which is then followed by acting as bodyguards with the boss's daughter, Trish. Giorno and Bruno see this as an opportunity to get close to the boss and kill him, so they willingly take the job. Meanwhile, traitors of the gang, who are skilled stand assassins, wish to kidnap Trish to lure out the boss. This forms half of Part 5, with the gang stars overcoming many obstacles and finally reaching their destination. It is at this moment where the series could have ended with a fight against the boss, but instead they retreat to uncover the boss's secret identity. And this is where Araki recycles the story, as now they are once again on the run from assassins as they try to meet a mysterious person, much like the previous arc in Part 5. This is the outline for the story, but that doesn't sum up Vento Aureo, as we experience a couple of new features. As mentioned earlier, the action and fights are the best additions in Golden Wind. I think everyone can agree that the fight with Pesci and Prosciutto is a great representative of an excellent fight in all of JoJo. It's a battle that goes back and forth between these four stand users, offering plenty of surprises, physical fighting, violent injuries, heart-beating suspense, and even manly moments. Many of the other battles feel the same way, often ending with a standoff, similar to Jotaro and Dio at the end of their fight, where the conflict is decided on whoever strikes the hardest. In short, Part 5's fast-paced action was a breath of fresh air and should keep everyone entertained. An obvious change from its previous parts is the art style, as it's now very fabulous, with characters dressing in very eccentric yet expressive fashion sets. Fugo in particular is the one I'm most baffled about with all of its holes. On the other hand, there's Bruno and Giorno revealing their chests while bearing some hints of feminine qualities. There are some angles where some characters look androgynous. You can't easily identify their gender. The number one example of this is Narancia, and I think on our first impression, everyone thought that he was a girl, but he's a boy. On a related note, characters' muscles look very different as we've seen in previous JoJo parts, and it's ironic how in the following story, Stone Ocean, which is filled with women, are more muscular and masculine than the men in Part 5. The art style itself has very little criticism and is more of a subjective opinion, but I want to address that the story does have its share of manly moments. While the characters don't look masculine, nor would you imagine them as gangsters or mafia-like, they do deliver a manly tone as seen in parts 1 and 2. To properly explain this, I think it's fitting that I now talk about the characters of Vento Aureo. Giorno Giovanna is very close to being a second Jonathan Joestar, as he bears very noble intentions in contrast to the other Joestars. But, like a Brando, Giorno doesn't have any qualms of getting his hands dirty. A good example is his encounter with the janitor in fighting Black Sabbath, which showed Giorno's benevolence and cruelty as he coldly killed Polpo. Personally, I don't see what's so good about Giorno other than his creative uses of the Stand Gold experience. He's cunning, but so is every other character in the JoJo series. Giorno just feels like wasted potential, mostly because of his origins as they're never acknowledged in the story. He may have a dream, but I feel Golden Wind was mostly focused on the next guy. Bruno Buccellati is the leader of the group who seems to have stolen the spotlight from Giorno, much like Polnareff did to Jotaro in Stardust Crusaders. Like Giorno, Bruno has his own motives for being in the gang, using criminal methods to fight against criminals. Despite his quirky introduction, the rest of the story presents him as a very mature individual who understands his teammates and pushes forward at any cost. In my opinion, Bruno seems to be the best written character in Part 5. A superstitious man weary of the number 4, Guido Mista often takes the lead in most battles using his skills as a marksman. Like the rest of the group, he's very determined, especially when nearly every fight he's in, Mista is constantly filled with puncture wounds by his own bullets. Despite always being injured, Mista will fight back. Narancia Girga personally feels inferior to his teammates, often trying to live up to their expectations. He acts as a scout for the group and tries his best to help in any way so he can repay their friendship. Leone Abbacchio is a man filled with regret and chooses to correct his way of life by aiding Bruno. He places the success of the mission over his own life and is willing to forfeit his safety if it meant a benefit for his team. Panokota Fugo also feels like a missed opportunity, as Araki pulled him out of the story for his stand ability being too broken. He originally debuted as a mentor for Narancia, but also held a short fuse. Aside from his one fight in the series, not much can be said about Fugo, but there is some information about his early departure on the trivia section of the JoJo Wiki. Lastly, there's Trish Una, who replaces Fugo, yet she doesn't add too much to the group. Like Fugo, Trish seems underutilized as a character, despite gaining some personal growth. Her goal is to learn her father's identity and cleanse her family lineage. Not a bad character, but one who needed more involvement other than acting as the plot device of the story. Since the entire main cast consists of gang members, I personally label them all as anti-heroes. Granted, most of these characters were forced into the criminal lifestyle, with Bruno acting as their guide. However, they do share qualities that aren't as noble when compared to previous characters in JoJo. In parts 3 to 4, enemies were rarely killed, ending most fights with a retired sign. Yet in part 5, they would occasionally kill their enemies and other times torture them. Two scenes come in mind when describing the gang stars as ignoble. A minor incident when the group is suspecting people as enemy stand users, in which they kick the shit out of a guy and did not care when they realized that he wasn't an enemy. Sure, the guy was being rude to them, but they even wanted to use him as a food taster for poison. Another scene is probably the one everyone remembers, is when Mista tortures an enemy by placing his eyelid on a hook and burning his eye with a magnifying glass while they are dancing. That's some black comedy. Despite their violent behavior, they have shown very respectable traits in terms of battle, as many of our anti-heroes sacrifice their limbs just to ensure their comrades' safety. It is these moments where it holds traits of manliness, or should I say, fabulous manliness! While on the subject of machismo, the villains of the series are all skilled stand user assassins. Another key difference in Golden Wind are the villains' characteristics, who unlike parts 4 and 3 were very committed to icing their targets. Because of this demeanor, the gangstar villains were mostly quite serious and rarely gave in like pansies as seen in Stardust Crusaders and Diamonds Unbreakable. What made these enemies memorable were their greedy stance, but also their allegiance to each other. The best example would be the pair Pesci and Bruschetto, who had this mentor-student relationship. As mentioned before, most of the villains die in this part, facing their final moments head on, which reminds me more of the mental fortitude of the Pitterman. However, not all the villains in Part 5 are warriors bearing pride. Some of the villains are very deranged, with the best examples being Melone, Cicolata, and Checo. As you read Part 5, you will see characters being incredibly vile and monstrous, with their stands such as Babyface, Grateful Dead, and Green Day, bringing the series' recurring trend of horror. For whatever reason, many villains are named after food written in the Italian language, and my personal favorites are Sale and Sucero, which translates to salt and sugar. These name puns is something you expect from Torigo, Dragon Ball, and even Kiniko Man. On a similar note, Araki starts to use some silhouettes on certain villains, developing a sense of suspense. It's an interesting visual decision, but it's not utilized enough to be really called a new art style in JoJo. To end this review, it's time to talk about the moments I think affected the quality of Vento Aureo. By far the most controversial villain of JoJo is Vento Aureo's main villain himself, Diavolo. While his initial mysterious appearance was very appealing, the character is sadly not as interesting as his predecessors. Diavolo is closer to Yoshikage Kira due to his need of wanting secrecy, unlike Cars and Dio who were ambitious. While Diavolo does indeed have ambition, he is too cowardly to be taken as a threat. He tends to boast his superiority over his opponents, but his constant urge of keeping his face hidden and the need to witness future events with his stand implies that he's scared of being killed. It doesn't help that Diavolo panics so much in bouts, especially when he's conversing with Doppio. Diavolo wants to conquer the world, but his desperation for secrecy and solitude hints more of wanting to hide from the world. While Dio Brando performed a similar function in Stardust Crusaders, the difference between him and Diavolo is that Dio at least interacted with his followers to the point where he persuaded some to do his bidding. To some, what affects the quality of Parte V would be the villain Diavolo, his confusing stand King Crimson, the unbelievable BS events for a certain recurring character, but most importantly would be the awkward structure to the ending. Part 5 doesn't really have a final battle, and concludes with an unnecessary epilogue. In the previous parts, Jotaro and Josuke had battles with their nemesis that went back and forth. However, the final fight between Giorno and Diavolo was too one-sided. What made things even more uncomfortable were the events taking place due to a certain renegade stand, which led to some unconventional danger, even hinting at the existence of other supernatural beings. But this idea is quickly dropped. Basically, the prelude to the final battle felt more climactic than the last fight of the series. There were some bad things towards the end, but what makes Part 5 strong? The tone and characters. Despite their flamboyant looks, the cast manages to have their own share of tragic past and manly moments, as most of their battles end in bloody injuries. While other JoJo characters had similar experiences, Parte V re-established the feel of a team that's more of a family, best shown during their boat scene of who's in or out. While I admit I didn't like the entire cast or all of the battles, I can safely say Vento Aureo succeeds in maintaining a mostly serious tone. Unlike parts 4 and 3, which had some filler-like battles, Golden Wind is to the point with little fluff. Part 5 ends a bit more on the tragic note, but if it weren't for some mediocre writing of Diavolo and the final battle, then Vento Aureo could have been better received as a 5th installment to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I'm the manly anime hero and I review manga so you can read it.